Welcome to the Scale CEO Leadership Series, where we engage with top healthcare executives to uncover the strategies, challenges, and innovations driving success in today's evolving industry. This series delivers exclusive insights from visionary leaders shaping the future of healthcare. Join us and subscribe as we explore leadership strategy and transformation at the highest level. I'm your host, Roy Besharano. All right, Scott Hayworth, welcome to the latest leadership series with Scale Community. We're post 50 now, podcasts over the last 4 years, so excited to keep the train moving forward. Welcome, Scott.
Well, thank you, Roy.
So I want to get going first and foremost by having you describe some of your background. I'm particularly interested in CareMount and ultimately CareMount's acquisition by Optum. For our audience who don't know who CareMount is, they've probably heard of Optum, but just describe this really impressive business that you built and what led you to it.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm a physician by training. I'm an OBGYN by training. Practiced for many years, and I was the first CEO of then the Mount Kisco Medical Group, which was rebranded as CareMount Medical. And I was CEO for 23 years before we were sold. When I took over, we were about 30 doctors, and when we sold, we were 500 doctors, 650 providers throughout the Hudson Valley of New York, and we had already grown into Manhattan as well. We had 650,000 patients, approximately $850 million in revenue, and 3,000 employees. We were a next-gen ACO. Actually, the year we sold, we were the most successful next-gen ACO in the country. So we did a lot of Medicare risk, traditional Medicare risk. We were just starting to go into the Medicare Advantage risk. At that point, we were just in pure Medicare risk. We were one of the initial MSSP groups in the country as well.
Define MSSP for the audience.
Sure. It's Medicare Shared Savings. That was one of the initial plans. And then things progressed. We didn't do as well as MSSP because MSSP looked at your past. And if you were very efficient in the past, you started off at a disadvantage. We did have a partner on that, and fortunately the partner took our losses. We knew we weren't going to make money on it going in. And then the next gen program we set up beautifully. We were able to save money in hospitals, save money in SNFs. And as a result of that, we were able to cut costs, and government got a nice big check, and all the taxpayers listening saved some money, and obviously our doctors prospered as well.
So if Liz Fowler was on the phone with us today, the former director of CMMI, who I interviewed a few weeks ago, she would say CareMount was definitely one of the winners of our $18 billion savings that value-based care generated across the country. CareMount was a significant contributor to what worked in terms of value-based care.
Well, without doubt. We were very, very successful. It was really a win-win-win. No one lost. Everyone gained as a result of that.
So a few questions around that. I don't want to call it experiment, but that successful case study. One is you started in fee-for-service and migrated into risk-based. What was that migration like? What did it require? My understanding is you invested heavily in analytics, value-based care analytics, in order to actually demonstrate savings. What was that investment like? Was it seamless? You transitioned from fee-for-service to value-based care. Was that in increments of 10% of revenues? So from 10% value-based care to 30 to 100, was it more binary than that? One day 0, the next day 100%. I imagine there was a period of time where it was a balance, part fee-for-service, part value-based care. That couldn't have been easy because those are two ships sailing in somewhat different directions. So just what was that experience like? How many years did it take? What worked? What didn't work?
Sure. Well, first of all, we were still a predominantly fee-for-service business when we sold. We were not a risk in commercial, and we were just turning a Medicare Advantage risk. But our Medicare risk was 100%. Risk with the federal government or traditional Medicare. Now, we always say it's 2 feet in 2 different canoes, and it's tough. It's very tough to manage an organization and physicians where in one sense are paid for risk and the other sense are paid fee for service. So we took that away And first of all, we want doctors taking great care of the patients, and they always did. But we put programs in place to support them. The first thing we had to do was we needed money to fund the programs. The way we did that was we outsourced a revenue cycle. By outsourcing a revenue cycle, we were able to save a lot of money, and we used a good piece of that to fund our value-based care, because we couldn't really take it out of the physicians' pockets in order to do that. We then gave the doctors the proper incentives. And being a large multi-specialty group, because we had all specialties, we incentivized all doctors. More of the money went to primary care than to the specialists, but we felt if we gave all the incentives to primary care and nothing to the specialists could keep our costs up. And we were a true multi-specialty group. Everyone were equal shareholders, so all the shareholders, and roughly 275 shareholders when we sold. So all doctors were able to prosper when we achieved our goals. Then we hired the right people to go out to teach the physicians how to do things differently. You can't do it overnight, but you can't wait and promise an incentive to the doctors. We gave some of the incentives up front and funded some things up front, so that way it helped move the cause along and help us get the performance we wanted.
So you built this value-based care program, and it sounds like you benefited from a relatively stable patient base from one year to the next in Hudson Valley, a little bit less mobility in payer relationships and in employment relationships and in actual residency location, like a little bit less patients moving from one state to the next in Hudson Valley than maybe what you might have to deal with in New York City. And so it seemed to work. It sounds like it was...
Not to correct you, we were in Manhattan too. The old Murray Hill Medical Group, which was across the street from NYU, joined us about 2 or 3 years before we sold. So they were a state-based business as well.
Was there a meaningful difference in performance in Manhattan versus Hudson Valley, or were they comparable?
Pretty comparable. The doctors in Manhattan had to learn. They were a few years behind in joining the program, so there's always a learning curve. But we had wonderful physicians. Many had trained at NYU and were very well trained and loved by their patients. So we were able to drive the change there as well.
Okay. And was the performance heavily influenced by your patients remaining within your multi-specialty captive network, or you were able to navigate and compensate for patients who were one day going to CareMount for services and the next day going to Mount Sinai for specialty services? How did you wrestle with that? Because I imagine the flow of data is challenged as soon as you do that. The control of behavior is challenged as soon as a patient does that. So how do you, because in Hudson Valley, you're dominant. In New York City, you're not. Yeah. So how do you wrestle with that?
Yeah, I don't like using the word dominant. That's a bad word. And, so
prevalent.
We're relevant. How about that? And so I think when you look at Manhattan, it's tougher because you have all those tertiary care organizations in the area. It is true that the minute the patient leaves your organization, the costs go up. Physicians who are doing procedures in the hospital instead of the ASC or instead of the office, all that is much more costly. So part of it is getting the right sites for your visits and making sure the care is done in the least costly way. Another major thing is keeping patients inappropriately out of subacutes and lowering their their length of stay, because in the subacutes, if they will take advantage and they will take the full allowed length of stay. So we did a lot of things. We moved hip replacements to more anterior hip replacements. So therefore, there was less rehab. Patients got rehab at home. So a lot of different moves we made that really didn't affect the physicians at all. I think the patients were real winners because they got better care. When you're paying for care coordinators to watch what's done for the patients and to make sure they're getting for all their visits and keeping them appropriately out of the hospital for inappropriate stays in the hospital or the ER, doing all those things, the patients get better care. So I'm very proud to say that, yes, we save money for us and the federal government, but we also took better care of patients.
And the savings, how did they sprinkle across the specialties? So was it before and after fee-for-service transition to risk-based, lots of savings in primary care utilization, ER utilization, cardiovascular, ortho, onco? What were the specialties where you enjoyed the most amount of savings?
Well, first of all, it starts with the primary care doctor because they're a captain of the team. And most of the profit went to the primary care doctors, which is appropriate because primary care doctors generally don't make what specialists do. So, but we made sure there was enough to be relevant for everyone. And for the specialties that's doing things in the right place, you can pay for a lot of level 2, level 3 visits. That's not where your spend is. Your spend is people go to the ER, people go to the hospital, people who have their surgeries done in the hospital that could be done in the ASC or the office. That's where your major spend is. If someone sees a couple more level 3s for high blood pressure, that's not what's going to drive up your cost. And in reality, maybe they're taking a little better care of the patient, so they're keeping them out of trouble. So we were less focused on how often a patient sought a visit in an outpatient facility, and more on the procedures and the spend and where the procedures were done.
And okay, that makes a lot of sense. So your own next-gen ACO performed extremely well, uniquely well. For all those clinicians, all those smaller practices that are members of an ACO versus building one, owning one as part of a large organization, what are some of the benefits that you have as a principal with full control over an ACO? You're negotiating directly with managed care groups. You're designing the kind of reimbursement program that you think makes more sense for your organization. Just walk us through how you're able to do things as the principal versus the recipient member.
Sure. Well, first of all, remember that you're negotiating with the federal government, so there are no negotiations. So in traditional Medicare, it's their football. Either you're going to play or not play. Unlike a Medicare Advantage agreement where there are negotiations and they're important. For traditional Medicare, there are no negotiations. I think you have to have trust with the physicians. Having MD after my name and not that's a requirement to be in a role like mine, but it's helpful. I think being a physician makes a difference to a lot of physicians because they know you've been in the trenches. I practiced for many years. And as a result of that, I always tell young physicians who want to be leaders, you have to first be a successful clinician. Because if you want doctors to follow you, they're going to follow you if they believe you're a good doctor. If you're not a good doctor, you can tell them whatever you want, they won't listen to you. And then, so I think when you have the doctor's back, you understand what you need to achieve. And you spend a lot of time, my team spends a lot of time as well as I spend a lot of time out there speaking to physicians. Relationship is key. Culture is key. You don't have a good culture, don't have trust, the doctors won't do what you need them to do.
So just the actual mechanics of it, I'm interested in. Your 650,000 patients, X% are MA eligible, MA enrolled. Let's say it's 10%, 65,000 patients. You show up to Medicare Advantage and you say, I have 65,000 patients that I want to treat through the Medicare Advantage risk-based program. They do what? They give you a contract and say, sign here, or they're customizing the terms of your risk-based agreement based on your specific criteria. What's the next step there?
Okay, so two pieces. Traditional Medicare, it's take it or leave it.
Take it or leave it. Ignore that.
Okay. So Medicare Advantage is like any other carrier negotiation, whether you're negotiating commercial or you're negotiating on Medicare Advantage. And sometimes, or often, the carrier will want to tie the two together. So what they'll do is, for different rates, at least in New York, they'll pay more for commercial than they will for Medicare Advantage. So Medicare Advantage, for our listeners who aren't as fluent as you and I are, that's for really both people who are above 65 and also people who are disabled. And so then it comes down to there's many to cut an MA deal. It can be a percentage of Medicare. It can be, it can go code by code. Usually on an MA deal, they'll do a percentage of Medicare. There may be different prices for surgery centers, different prices for sometimes they want to pay less for imaging, let's say. So it's really, once you've seen one deal, you've seen one deal. But
and so you're trying to get the best per member per month rates across your different specialties, the best savings ratios across your different specialties. Are you focused on the mathematics that they're going to use to derive those savings? Is your value-based care team running models as you negotiate that contract? I imagine they are. So is that sort of a flavor for what's going on at that point in time?
If you don't have the data, you can't be successful.
Yeah.
We used a product called Arcadia, and they're still out there. So Arcadia did a lot of our population health data, and as a result, they were very good. But we had a very successful team, including quants and people who probably belonged on Wall Street, and they really understood data and knew how to really drill down in data, and that's important because without the data, the carriers have lots of data, and let's be honest, the carriers are very smart people, and they don't want to lose. So you have to come to the table fully armed and able to negotiate out of strength, not out of weakness.
And the aspiration is that looking 1 year ahead, you can estimate utilization and savings quite accurately, and then work backwards from there. And you're renegotiating on an annual basis, or these are auto-renew agreements that you sort of leave alone?
Yeah, we like to do 3 to 5 year negotiation because the amount of effort goes into it. But remember, it's called risk for the reason because there's risk. And so you can have a bad flu season. I mean, some of the public companies make announcements all the time. Well, our medical costs were higher last year. They were lower. So, depending on the flu season, depending on lots of different things, they want to obviously make sure all your patients have flu shots and a big component of flu shots. When it was the obstetrician, I made all my pregnant patients get flu shots. And I think, but things like that make a difference. So
it is interesting. You really immediately start to think like a payer, with utilization being something that you want to try to limit, minimize, not enjoy and revel in, which is what your typical fee-for-service model does.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want an appropriate limit, but you want to make sure it's appropriate use.
Yeah,
but you
makes
also
sense.
You also want to keep the population healthy, which for me is the key component, because now we're paid to do the right things for patients. In the past, if you kept people healthy, it hurt your bottom line because there were less visits. Now, if you keep people healthy, the patient wins, the providers win, everybody wins.
So I want to shift gears a little bit into CareMount and Optum.
Sure.
What happened that led to the transaction, and how did CareMount change post-transaction? You remained, in fact, you grew within Optum your reach and levels of responsibility. You saw more and more. So how did your understanding of CareMount change once you put on an Optum set of glasses and adopted that sort of lens?
Yeah, so without a doubt, we were coming out of COVID. And what COVID taught me, we were a strong organization going through COVID. We managed well. We really survived. But it was tough. I mean, we had to furlough half our staff every week because to get the federal money, if you remember, Roy, you had to put half the people on unemployment and furlough them. And each week, you remember, they had doctors working with staff they weren't used to. And that's when I realized how vulnerable we were as an organization. Because what impressed me about Optum was at the same time, Optum didn't lay off anybody. And I thought, wow, I would be in for 6 to 8 weeks, work 7 days a week in the executive office. There were about 10 of us who basically kept the place going with all our great staff of employees and our doctors and nurses. And that taught me we were vulnerable. So we were looking at the market. You couldn't ignore the market. I mean, valuations were very, very high. So we decided to put our toe in the water to see what we were truly worth. And at that point, COVID really came around. And so we're coming out of COVID. We had put things on a halt. And what impressed me about the process is we didn't say anything to anyone. And it's amazing. You read all about yourself in the trade journals and how CareMount was trying to sell, and they put things up on a hold because of COVID and everything. And it was unbelievable because we weren't telling anyone anything. And amazing how things leak out. It was a very tight circle, but obviously not tight enough.
You can normally blame a very press connected investment banker for those leaks.
I was gonna either that or press connected lawyer, one or the other. I was gonna say that someone who
likes doing favors so that they can call on those favors in the future.
So it got out there. So we came out of COVID, and we didn't know what we were going to do. So I met with Dave Wickman, who was CEO of United Health Group at the time, the parent company, and he asked me. He said, "Why don't you let us just, preempt everything and we'll just buy you folks?" So I said, "Well, let me speak to our bankers," and he said, "That's a good answer," because I wasn't going to say yes or no alone in a room with him. I was with him and John Rex, who was the CFO, who's now the president of United. And so we decided to do a skinny process. So we basically did 3 strategics. So we didn't want to do a big, huge process. We just sort of said, let's see what 3 strategics are willing to pay. And Optum won for a number of reasons. One, they obviously made a very strong offer. But 2, I felt that at that point, they already were maybe representing 7% of doctors in America. By the time I left Optum, we were over 10% of all doctors either worked for or affiliated with Optum. And what happened was, I felt, put money aside, Optum was the right place for us to end up because they were so primary care focused and they were so risk focused that I thought it was important to me that I leave the organization with the right stewards. And so Optum won the bid. And then 3 months later, after we joined, my boss quit. So they put me in charge of one of the 5 regions in the country. So they had 2.5 to 3 billion of revenue under me, 2,250 providers, 10,000 people, 2.5 million patients in the tri-state. And that role for maybe 18, 20 months. And then my boss at the time, Dr. Wyatt Decker, asked me to become the first chief physician liaison officer of the country. And so my final year at Optum, my job was to sort of go around the country, interact with groups that were part of Optum, groups that weren't part of Optum. And people would say, well, you're here to buy me. And I said, obviously, if you were interested in selling, we'd be happy to speak with you. But I'm also sort of that person who you want to do a risk deal with Optum, or you don't know who to call at Optum or who at United. I can be sort of an interface for you so that you can know who to call. And so
you got to know the Optum business platform very well, intimately. You got a deep education, and nationally as well. What did you learn about the way that Optum manages a business like CareMount versus the way that you managed CareMount? What if you had to highlight the big differences, what would they be?
Well, first of all, I'm very entrepreneurial by nature. And big companies, it doesn't matter whether it's United, I'm sure CVS. I was in the National Physician Advisory Board for 15 years and done private equity for many years. I would say that public companies, large public companies, probably pretty much work the same. First of all, there's a quarter-to-quarter mentality. When you're a public company, it's important that you produce the numbers every quarter. If not, your stock's going to take a hit. So I think every public company is focused that way. Private equity can look at more the 5 years or 7 years they own an asset, and they can look at the big picture, because as long as at the end of the day, you grow and get to the point where they want to be, so you can have some bumps along the road that are easier. Public companies, unfortunately, they're under the microscope, so they're watched very closely. I think that's one difference. I think also decision making. I could make decisions at a very, when I ran CareMount, I reported to a board of 24 doctors, which was interesting. That's a podcast on its own, just talking about working for a board of 24 doctors. But I think in some ways it was easier working for a large company like Optum because I could make more decisions locally. But other ways it was tougher because more decisions had to go up the food chain and sort of decision tree, and any large decisions I couldn't make. So a lot of decisions were made more centrally. So like any job, any organization, there's pluses and minuses to each.
So tangibly, how does that manifest to a different business, CareMount, 2 years after Optum owns it? What fundamentally changed in the business? Did it expand and invest in value-based care more? Did it decrease the focus? Did it invest more in analytics and AI? Did it move into different geographies? Did it focus more on urology and less on cardiology? What changed?
So I think, I think without that, Optum has is very focused on value-based care. I think they have a lot of resources that we couldn't afford. So they can fly a SWAT team in of 10, 15, 20 people if you identify an issue, and they can work with you on that. So there was a lot of resources that we couldn't afford as CareMount. So maybe you lose a little on the entrepreneurial side, but you make it up on the capital and resource side.
Did you see analytics from Optum that you weren't used to seeing before? Insights into procurement, into risk? Which departments benefited the most, do you think? Or maybe this just wasn't your focus. Maybe you moved on from CareMount. So forgive me if it's an area that you didn't necessarily spend time on.
No, I think without a doubt, the risk analytics are excellent. I think they are insurance. United, even though there's a firewall between Optum and United, being sort of insurance-based, and you have a lot of former United executives on the Optum side. On the insurance side, obviously there's a lot of knowledge and infrastructure and understanding, and on the risk side, without a doubt. I think procurement, more central procurement, a lot of things are more central. Real estate management is central. And so I think there's value in the size because you're able to better understand, they're able to get discounts and do things maybe in a smarter way, but sometimes having world local management's better. So I think like everything, I think there's pluses and minuses, and it just, but on the value side, on the risk side, no doubt about it, the scale is very heavily in favor of Optum. They understand the business very, very well.
What is the future from Optum? What did you learn about the company and what it does well within United? What do you think? Where do you think it goes the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, it can't own all the doctors. I mean, at some point, it starts to look more like Standard Oil and Bell Labs than just one more actor in the healthcare ecosystem. There must be a cap on how many doctors you can employ. So given that, what does the company, how does it evolve over the next 5 to 10 years?
So first of all, I've been gone for 14 months. So just so people know, my information is no longer coming. And
it's better than mine. It's better than mine, that's for sure.
And no doubt, learning about Optum and United, it's definitely from board seats and all the things I'm doing now, it definitely added to my CV that people want to talk to me about the topics you're just speaking with me about. I think Optum's going to continue to grow. I think United's going to continue to grow. I think a lot's going to be driven by the federal government, because if the federal government starts moving more and more into risk and more control over reimbursements and how things are done, I think you're going to see fewer and fewer managed care companies. Maybe Anthem acquires more Blue Cross entities out there, and I will continue to grow. I will argue with you that the key is not doctor number, but the right doctors. So a perfect example in the Houston market, once I was in Optum, we acquired Kelsey Siebold, which is a great asset down in Houston. We acquired Crystal Run in Orange County, New York. We acquired Atrius in Boston. To acquire a number of leading physician groups. Optum likes either primary care multi-specialty. They're also acquiring specialty groups as well now. And as a result of that, I think it's putting the jigsaw puzzle together correctly so that you have the right assets in the right markets. So you don't need to own 100% of the physician. Same way I did as CareMount. We had competition everywhere, but I made sure I acquired or had the doctors that patients wanted to see, the quality doctors joined us, and that's what made it quality. So I think Optum is very focused on quality as well.
Yeah, look, we talk about this all the time from many different perspectives, but fundamentally asking the same question. Now, is there anything more powerful in healthcare than an organized network where data is shared? And so far, I think the answer is no. No matter how good AI technology gets, if you don't have the data to analyze, it doesn't matter how quick you are at analyzing it. The first step is actually organizing and sharing data. So you have to assume that Optum's network is very well positioned to analyze a very large amount of data. And that's very valuable. What comes from that? Change in behavior, right?
Yeah, I think also if you look at Optum, I agree with you, data is key. I think Optum is moving more over the years now to be more of an operating company than a holding company. So we were the last group that was bought when they were still sort of a holding company. And sort of
that's very interesting. Keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, but they're moving more into standardization among the medical groups and taking the great things that each group does. Each group they acquire does something well and sort of moving that. So Kelsey Siebold does commercial risk in Houston very, very well. So taking the learnings from Kelsey and moving it elsewhere in the organization. And Optum's very good about having national meetings where we all sort of learn from the best from each medical group. CareMount's Next Gen ACO program is something which really wasn't being done by others. They're all doing MA risk, and it's a very different program. So there's a lot of things that everyone brings to the table. I think CareMount had superb specialists, and I think that way we handle our specialists is very different. When you look at the California market, it's very different than the New York market. And I think, one thing Optum is learning is that you've seen one market, that not every market's the same. And so, they're obviously huge in the Pacific Northwest with Everett and Polyclinic that now is Optum Washington. Massachusetts, they took Reliant, and Atrius made it Optum Massachusetts. In the tri-state, we rebranded ProHealth Riverside and CareMount and Crystal Run into Optum. That was done on my watch. We're standardizing EMRs. We have a couple of different ones. They view Epic as a key EMR now, electronic medical record. And besides Epic, I don't know what else they're using today, but they've looked at a bunch of other ones. And the goal is to have a few different EMRs so we're not dependent on one. In this way, the groups have a choice. But perfect example, when you deploy Epic, they can bring a whole army of people in to help you deploy Epic. And CareMount's now on Epic, where they were on Next Gen before. And so, there's a lot of positives. But I think the one, probably the only real negative is that doctors are used to owning their own group, and now they're not owners anymore. They're employees. And the private equity model is a little different because the private equity doctors still maintain ownership. I'm chairman of the board of U.S. Digestive Health, which is a GI role in Pennsylvania and Delaware with 180 physicians. And the doctors still own part of the group, and it's PE-backed, But I think that's probably, if you say what's the one negative, doctors don't own group anymore. Now, some groups in the country that Optum buys, the doctors still have some ownership. We had some ownership, but we sold the final piece back to Optum a year earlier than we thought we would. And so I think every model has its strengths and weaknesses. And I think if you say what's one negative Optum model, I think docs perform better when they're still part owners of the group.
The question is, what constitutes part ownership? A fraction of a fraction or a minimum threshold? And for every doctor, it's a different answer. So even that test is an interesting one, a complicated one. But I certainly take the point that having a vested ownership interest, the principal versus the agent, yields different results. So I get it. I'm not sure I have an answer for it quite yet, because we are seeing these large groups with diluted ownership do things and perform in ways that small practices just haven't in the past. But at some point, you end up with a health system culture where everyone's an agent, and that culture is different. The transition from founder culture, founder ownership, founder passion to agent culture, it's just another job, is a slippery slope that a lot of operators are focused on, because there's no easy answer to it. How do you get large, very large, and still maintain a level of commitment to the underlying brand? Very few companies have been able to pull it off. Speaking of other companies, Dooley, Summit, we spoke about Optum, ProHealth, VillageMD, Privia. What do those names mean to you? They're all in the primary care, multi-specialty, value-based care game, to put it a little bit crassly. Some have had more success than others. Who stands out to you as a winner? And who do you think of as someone that needs to do a lot of work?
Well, I mean, a lot of my friends run those groups. My former chief operating officer at CareMount now runs Summit. Chris Lafani is a very talented executive. We were ahead of Summit on value-based care when we sold. My friend Jeff LaVenture was running them at the time, and I was a much bigger proponent than Jeff is. My friend Paul Merrick runs Dooley out in Chicago. I think they're still, they're PE backed. Aries is their sponsor, and obviously you all know Village's issues with Walgreens, and Village owns CityMD and Summit. Privia, I was on when Privia went public. I was part of a company called Brighton Health with Bill Sullivan. I was on the board of Brighton, and we bought Privia. So I was on the board, and then I eventually went off the board. Our doctors were part of ISIP and LLC. Our doctors were invested in Privia and Medicare. Brighton owned both, and then we spun the two off, and so our doc did very well when Privia went public. Sean Morris did an incredible job of growing Privia, and then took it public. So a lot of executives I have a lot of respect for of all these organizations. And they've been peers over the years. I think they're different models. Privia, unless it's changed, the doctors are employees, but their staff still are their own. So it's a little more entrepreneurial. They've grown excessively. They've done some health system deals. They're a public company. Obviously, Village is part of Walgreens. I don't know the percent ownership of the public company. Dooley is still PE backed but private. Now Dooley's now bought some other groups in the country. They own down in South Bend. They own a group in South Bend. They own a group in Indiana, and so they moved it outside of the Chicago region. I think primary care today is a tough business. And I don't care what your model is. It's a tough business. I will go back and say one thing. You mentioned before about smaller practices. I don't think 2, 4, 8 doctor practices can exist and survive. So whether you're part of a 200 doctor practice or 10,000 doctor practice, I think part of it depends on market. I felt in the New York market at 500 doctors and 650 providers, even though we had 650,000 patients, I felt CareMount wasn't big enough to go along with all the big tertiary systems around the Northwells, the Sinai's, the NYU's, the New York Presbyterians. So, but I think you have to be larger. Then once you're larger, I think that the way you can look at it is you could become part of a Privia, could become, which is a different flavor. You could become an Optum, which is a totally different flavor. And the third one, obviously, is a P-backed one. And even with an Optum, there are some groups that won't mention by name where the physicians still own part of it, where you can be 100% owned. So I think it's all variable, and I think there's all these different options out for people.
I see a difference
between
a Dooley and Summit, which owns a fair amount of single specialty to complement their primary care, and they do a fair amount of fee-for-service. They might be geographically centered and focused versus a Kano and an Oak Street that might be, more focused on primary care, more focused on value-based care, more national, everywhere, all the time. And I see a difference in sort of niche primary care plays like One Medical, which is, we were podcasting with Amir, the former CEO, before it sold to Amazon, which was really more of an employer-focused primary care solution with an employee base in mind, or maybe a ChenMed and some of the other primary care groups that grew large but focused on maybe a certain demographic along the way. We've seen very successful primary care demographic strategies. Let's target the Asian market, let's target the Latin market. So there are these different models out there, and some have proven to be a lot more resilient, financially secure than others. Some have grown quickly, but tend to always be chasing their expenses, their infrastructure costs.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, and this probably shows my CareMount background, and Dooley and Summit are sort of structured similarly. I think if you're a primary care group and you're not multi-specialty, you don't have control of your specialists, I think it's very hard to survive. And the reason is because of cost. If you're going to do, first of all, fee-for-service wise, specialists pay for a lot of expenses. And if you're in risk, the specialists determine where your care is provided and how you save money. So I think now California is a totally different animal because you can subcontract with a lot of specialty groups, so it's a lot easier. But outside California, it's very, very hard. So I think you're seeing a lot of trouble out there among a lot of the primary care groups. And some of them you've mentioned, I won't go into specifics on those groups, but there's a lot of trauma out there. And I think it's very hard when you're just a primary care group.
It's almost like, it's not exactly like, they obviously play a critical role and provide great value, but in terms of the economics that are available today, the analogy would be having a large primary care group and nothing else is almost like having a large sales team and no product.
Correct. And so, I think some of them are turnarounds now, which hopefully they will. Look, we all take care of patients. Patients are the center of everything we do. So we can sit here and talk about profits. We can sit here and talk about revenues. But the bottom line is you got to be able to sleep at night, and you got to know you're doing the best you can for people. And I can say at CareMount, we always did what was right for the patient. And some things we lost money on, but we did with open eyes. It was okay because we made sure we made our bottom line, because obviously you can't stay open. But we always took care of our employees, our doctors, our patients, and always did the right thing. And we were able to figure it all out year after year to make sure that we kept our doors open.
That's the happy balance, right? You can't take care of patients if you're closed, but you shouldn't be open if you're not taking care of patients. So it's sort of a happy equilibrium. So multi-specialty is your world. You've grown up in it. You've loved it since day one, but you've been involved with at a board level, still involved, single specialty platforms at scale. You've already spoken about practices. Let's talk about multi-specialty versus large single specialty platforms. Let's ignore the smaller practices. So think about the Solarises in urology, or think about the GI Alliances or your own gastro platform. Think about the groups in derm, dental that have achieved meaningful scale, and sort of think about what is their role in the future? How do they play alongside large multi-specialty groups, if at all? Do they have a future? Do they all at some point get consumed by a large multi-specialty group? And also maybe some context to where all this fits into the health system ecosystem. right? If we're talking about 5,000 hospitals and the largest 150 health systems own the vast majority of those hospitals and also own outpatient assets and are building outpatient assets, where did those three pillars connect or intersect as the years roll by?
So first of all, 7, 8 years ago, I had said that I thought in 10 years, there'll be only 5 to 10 big health systems or big conglomerates, whether it's an Optum or whether it's a Northwell, or that control many lives in the country. I'm probably a little ahead of my time. Maybe it's another 10 years, but I think eventually we're going to get to the point where there's only 5 to 10 systems. I think from my point of view, and I've seen a lot. I've done private equity for 18 years and boards for 18 years. I've seen a lot of single specialty. Single specialty is easier to manage than multi-specialty.
For sure.
First of all, the physicians are all rowing in the same direction, so it makes it a lot easier.
There's a little less to analyze.
And you'll have the same tension because physicians are human beings, and there's a pot of money. Everybody wants more. And it doesn't mean it does happen in single specialty, but you can reward the same way. So you have to be
it's the one golden rule of business. Everyone's underpaid.
That's right. You are correct. And so as a result of that, and being intimately involved with running a GI practice for 6 years, without doubt, we have great doctors, great care of patients. We scaled, we grew. So it's all good. I think it depends on the markets again. I think, like, let's take U.S. Digestive Health, since I'm so familiar with them. Except for health systems that have some GIs, we're really the private practice model in Pennsylvania. In Delaware, there are practices that still exist, small independent practices, but less and less. It'd be very hard for a hospital system to play with apples, because when you have 180 GIs, you're really a substantial part of the market. And as a result of that, I think whatever eventually happens, you're that major piece in the market. I think, again, it depends on the market. If you had 180 GIs in New York City, be major, but there's still Columbia would have them, Cornell would have them, NYU would have them. So I think it depends on the market. But I don't think the large single specialty groups are going away at all. I think they may get acquired to bigger and bigger ones. You bring up GIA. GIA bought a lot of assets around the country, large gastroenterology group, Jim Weber's group, and they've done a good job of putting assets together. And they were recently acquired, in the process of being acquired right now. And so single specialty is here to stay. I think the question though is, when you think of the ultimate, eventually, we can't keep doing things the same way we're doing them now. Healthcare in America is too expensive. I agree that a lot of it we own ourselves. I don't think we've taken good care of ourselves as a population. And I won't get political here, but I actually agree with Bob and Kennedy that we really need to be healthier. We need to take better care of ourselves. And I think that, forget politics for a second, I think most Americans would agree with it. And when you see some of the things that are put in our food compared to Europe and other places, you're like, why are all these things in our food? Why do they get rid of red dye number 3? And you say to yourself, well, why, if they thought it wasn't good, what took them so long to get rid of red dye number 3?
You have to listen to our prior podcast with the former head of the FDA, Dr. Eschenbach, and you'll get an answer.
Okay, good. Well, I'm not a podcast or a guy, but I'll definitely have to do that.
We're going to get you into podcasts. You're definitely a podcast guy today.
And so, as a result of that, I look at it and say, when people say, well, why American medicine isn't good? I disagree 100%, 1,000%. We have the best healthcare. We have the best doctors, the best nurses, the best employees on the front line, the best medicines. We're expensive for a number of reasons. One is, obviously, drug companies in other markets sell their drugs for less, and I don't understand that one at all. But the other thing is, we don't take good care of ourselves. Walk around, look at the obesity. I know Roy's nice and thin, and but there's a lot of people who don't take good care of themselves, and that's driving the cost up for everyone. Now in Europe and elsewhere, you have a lot of cigarette smoking, but smokers, people just not doing what's right. Now it's going to be interesting watching Lilly and the others with their their weight loss drugs, and hopefully that's going to thin out America. What concerns me is we don't know what all the side effects are yet. It's too early in the game. But when you can take people off their antihypertensives and take people off their diabetes medicines by helping them lose weight, that's fantastic. And so hopefully we'll continue to take better care of ourselves, which will cut the cost curve. As the American population gets older, we are going to have more and more cancer, more and more people need admissions to hospitals because just, if something else isn't hurting a population, something else will. But I think we sort of own some of this problem ourselves. It's fine to blame American medicine, but there's some personal responsibility that people have to take.
I want to finish on a final question for you. What are you most excited for U.S. healthcare as you broaden out a vision for this industry over the next 5 to 10 years? What do you think will be different if we were to have this podcast 5 to 10 years from now? What would we be celebrating?
I think the developments. I think the technological developments. I own my own company now, Hayworth Ventures, and I do I do investing, I do board seats, I do consulting, so I see a lot of ideas. So I'm blessed that just like you are, Roy, I know you see a lot of ideas as well. I think technology, AI, I think wearables, I think virtual care. There's so many things that are going to come into effect, and hopefully we'll also take better care of ourselves. That's what I'm excited about. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning, to make sure we're making a difference in the world, to make sure that we are doing our best. I'm wearing, if you look, this is a wearable I'm wearing. I'm on the board of a company, and we're able to predict infection early. We're able to predict preeclampsia early. Now, these are early on, and I can't go into the mechanism with you because I'm not allowed to. But it's amazing to me, this will transform healthcare. When we get antibiotics on board faster, when we, pregnant hypertensives, we prevent them from seizing, prevent baby morbidity and mortality because we're taking better care of our patients and better care of populations. That's what's going to make the difference. So I hope
a heavy focus on patient awareness, self-awareness in ways that will dwarf what we currently do today.
Correct. And patient responsibility. Yeah. Now we're a society where it's a legal society. We're a society that blames everyone else for our own issues. And that doesn't work. I think people have to have ownership. I think whether it's physicians with ownerships of their groups or whether it's patients with ownerships of their care, I think ownership is very, very important. And it's not okay to say to someone all the time, it's your fault. But what are you doing to make things better? Wasn't it Jack Kennedy who said many years ago, his famous quote about, don't ask what your country can do for you. I'm going to butcher the quote, but you know the quote I'm talking about. What can you do for your country? Same way, what can you do for your own health?
On that note, Scott, I want to thank you for your time today. It was very informative, very enlightening, and lovely to stay in touch with you. And hopefully we can collaborate in the future. Did you have fun?
I had a great time. Thank you.
My pleasure.